Today, we're joined by our top two mayoral candidates. Seattle 4 has a history of providing a forum for important elected officials, as well as the top candidates in key races. Today's program clearly highlights the candidates who seek to lead our city and won our votes in the November 2nd election. As we've heard in several of our programs this year, the future economic vitality of our community depends on effective leadership. I want to acknowledge club member Mark Davis with the classification of financial advising and wealth management for inviting and securing our two candidates to speak. During the presentations, you're invited to submit brief questions through the Zoom chat feature. Please be sure you have your first and last name in the meeting profile for our moderator to identify the source of the questions. Moderating our candidate presentations today is our very own past president, Mark Wright, with the classification of media. I've come to truly respect and admire Mark's focus on truth in his reporting. It's not surprising to me that he has received 4 Emmys for his investigative reporting. In addition to his very visible evening news anchor role on KING5 TV, Mark's skills have been used by Rotary International to moderate and introduce key international RI leaders. In recent months, Mark has been awarded special recognition from his alma mater, Washington State University, and its Edward R. Murrow School of Journalism. So now we welcome to the podium Mark Wright, who will introduce our candidates. Welcome, Mark.
Jimmy, thank you. President Jimmy, fellow Rotarians and guests, it's really good to see you today, and especially to the two candidates, Bruce Harrell and Lorena Gonzalez. Certainly an honor to have both of you here. This is going to be a fun conversation where we're really going to get to understand the differences, I think, between these two candidates. So, Mr. Harrell, it's great to have you here. The first question that I'd like to ask you, you served on the Seattle City Council from 2008 to 2019. At that point, you decided it was time to leave the council. So my first question is, why was it time to leave the council then, and why did you feel it's time to run for mayor now?
Well, thank you, Mark, for the question, and thank all of you Rotarians for spending some afternoon time to talk about this great city that we love, Seattle. So to answer your question directly, 12 years on the council as a policy leader and as one who is pretty effective at looking at a budget and making allocations. I figured it was just, quite frankly, time. My community service did not stop at that point. I went back into private practice and continued to work with affordable housing developers. I didn't stop public service at all. In fact, I probably at some point would eye retirement, but I didn't retire. In fact, I was working even more feverishly. And then, of course, 3 months after, we all get hit with COVID, the COVID pandemic. But my public service in elected office, I figured 12 years was it. And it was not a big epiphany or thing, and just 12 years was enough. But quite candidly, as the mayoral race started to unfold and I saw the conditions in Seattle, and I don't have to describe to any of you great Rotarians the conditions that I saw, because it's the same conditions you see. And I'm sure these questions will lend themselves to what those conditions are. And I thought, based on everything that I've done personally and professionally and civically, philanthropically, that this would be a great time to pull a team together and lead. And so I tell groups that when I'm working on this campaign, it's our time. It's our time to bring a commonsensical approach to city politics, to clean up the litter on the streets, to look at the graffiti, to look at the homelessness crisis, and to truly act with values and database decisions, but to move forward. So that was the discussion I had with my wife and family and my confidants, and we haven't looked back. We have not looked back, Mark.
During your time on the council, Mr. Harrell, what are you most proud of in terms of your accomplishments during those 12 years on the council?
Sure. You know, I'll remind people that in, I think, 2010, I was the only person of color on the council. It just so happened to be that way. And as we do have some great diversity on the council now, to a large extent, I was being asked by many underrepresented groups all around the map, any demographic you could think of to sort of be their champion. And I took that on very proudly. But when I actually think about some of my greatest accomplishments, one is sort of wonky, and that is creating a $100 million rainy day fund and a city light review panel for city light, because that will be what I will be known for as a mayor. And what we did there is I looked at who sets the rates and who allocates the costs and how the operations could become more effective to protect ratepayers. We all enjoy less expensive hydroelectric power here, but you saw what happened down in Texas when it's not done right in recent times. So what I did is I gave our largest customers, Boeing, who pays $1 million a month in their power bill, Nucor, $1 million a month in their power bill. I gave climate change activists and low ratepayers or low income advocates access to the same information that the mayor and the city council had. This was unprecedented. And in that capacity, we sold off surplus property. We put in a temporary surcharge, and we created a rainy day fund for $100 million to address rate fluctuations, if you will. Didn't get a lot of fanfare, but it's really groundbreaking to be able to open up the books, if you will, to people who are vested in the outcome of the utility. Now, I was, of course, known for the Race and Social Justice Initiative, the equity lens by which we address all city politics. I was known for my bias-free policing law, where we track, who could be subject to racial profiling. I came out first with body cameras, and people thought I was out of my gourd putting cameras on cops, but I went to Kane Hall and debated this against the ACLU and made sure that eventually we would deploy these cameras. I passed the ban the box legislation. Again, a lot of resistance that would require employers to look at the person's qualifications and not whether they committed a crime many years ago. And people say, well, that's a tough pill to swallow, but I stuck to it because I look at so many people in my community that were the victim of the war on drugs. And I said that they want to reestablish their lives. So I champion these kinds of causes. But as mayor, I think the greatest things that have been done in the city, as I've said in other forums, were not so much by city council. I mean, if I ask you who's the superstar in the council and what's their signature legislation, you have to scratch your head. Well, what was that person's signature legislation? They're done by civic activists, mayors, visionaries. And so I'm looking forward to leading as a mayor, because I think now, as someone said earlier, this is probably one of the most important elections we've seen certainly in recent times.
I've talked to a number of Seattle business and nonprofit leaders, and to a person, each one has told me until Seattle is safe, nothing else matters. Do you agree with that statement? And what would you do as mayor to fix that problem?
I do agree that you layer all of the parts of our societal ecosystem over strong public safety. And when I announced my kickoff 8 months ago, I had proudly police officers at my kickoff. And I said, I don't subscribe to the defund police narrative. And that was controversial for me to do that. But at the same time, I had leaders from the NAACP and the social justice circles and everywhere other advocate realizing that I protect all communities. This should not be a divisive conversation. So I believe in effective public safety. I do not believe in biased or unreasonable bias policing or unreasonable force. And so you layer on that. And this, by the way, crosses across all socioeconomic levels, race, black, white, yellow, brown, red, any combination thereof, rich, poor, everything in between. They want safe communities. They want 7-minute response times. And they deplore racist and unreasonable force. This should not be a divisive conversation. And so I think what happened in City Hall was, yeah, people are angry. We understand that. That's why I brought specifically up the George Floyd murder. And I said, everyone should be able to say that was murder. That was inhumane. So what we're going to do, we are going to examine where a gun and badge goes, but we will fund the police department. We will measure 7-minute response times. We'll get our numbers up from 900 up to around the 1,300 to 1,400 level. We will open up the books so you can see what our 911, particularly our crime in progress priority 1 calls will be. We will also deploy, working with our college system, a new kind of officer. We will use a certification process, and we will recruit from communities of color and underrepresented groups who want to protect their communities. And this becomes groundbreaking because there's a whole bench of people out there who want to protect their communities. They do not want to walk around with a gun and badge. And this is a grade above a community service officer or a park ranger. This is a person who will be well versed in public safety strategies, de-escalation, mediation. They will also know, however, that a gun and badge is not necessary for many of these functions. And so I'm not just thinking about 2022, I'm thinking about what Seattle will look like with these kinds of officers walking our streets, building community, building public trust. But yes, we will layer the other components of a successful society on strong public safety.
So let's transition into policing. The current police department is really experiencing an exodus of uniformed officers. Many of them are citing the recent police reforms passed at the state level, also the threats to defund the department. Why should police officers in Seattle stay and serve if they feel like the city doesn't have their backs? And what would you do as mayor to try to repair that?
Well, that is going to be both the mayor's job, the mayor's team's job, and the chief of police to make sure that we are changing completely the narrative that is now in City Hall. I witnessed Dr. Fisher, who prides himself on working on retention and recruiting strategies in the police department. And I saw him basically cross-examined and demoralized when he was simply trying to say, City Council, can you take any responsibility for the narrative that you all have created to demoralize this police department? Now, I have a pretty strong background in motivating people. I mean, I'm a team person. We put on a website when I was on a team when I was 8, 9 years old, and I've always been on teams. And when I'm in discussions, I try to pull out people who are sort of passive or silent, because sometimes the richness of their thinking is overshadowed by those speaking the loudest. So what we will do is we will pull out the informal leaders in the police department, many of whom will change the culture. We'll make sure that the new chief of police, when he or she walks in a room, will not only command respect, but will realize one of their competencies must be to build trust with communities. So we will lift up the morale. We will go back and start with the basics. We will look at their oath of office. And I'll give you a specific example, Mark, and I will keep my answers a little tighter. You're going to see, was this guy charging us a word a minute? It's getting a little verbose. So let me tighten my answers up a little bit. I could read body language even through Zoom. I was down at Judkins Playfield last week, and there was these football teams, primarily all African-American parents and community leaders and football teams and first responders. And there was a shooting there, as you may recall, a week before. And these parents and their children were fearful because this was the last game of the season. It was like a homecoming event. And so I went down there by myself, and they asked me to speak to the kids. And the police officers were there. And I said, look, I said, these officers are here to protect you. We have to understand that. And they were warmly received. And the officers felt really good about, yes, that is why we're here. We're not here to over police you. We're not here to harass you. We are here to love you. And I heard Nick Anderson talk about that word love. I use that word love and I use that word faith all the time on the campaign trail. And I know I'm quite unique in doing that because that is sustainable. And officers, I tell them all the time that when you love a community and you are here to protect a community, that is sustainable. And most officers understand that. So we're going to change the culture. And as we change the cultures, you will see new officers and new kinds of officers come on our ranks. And it's going to be a good day for Seattle.
A lot of people agree that homelessness is the issue facing the next mayor. I'd like to just hear your thoughts about homelessness. Do you think housing first is the right strategy? And do you think this new King County Regional Homelessness Authority, this consolidated approach, is a step in the right direction?
Yes, I think housing first is the right approach. You don't condition their housing on whether they have, as an example, have remedied their addiction, if in fact they are addicted to a drug. And I think the regional approach, I voted for it. My opponent did not. I think that is the right approach. We have 84 square miles in Seattle. It's hard enough for a barista or a teacher to live in Seattle, or a student or a person on fixed income. And so we need regional partners to both build and treat ourselves out of this issue. And for me, what we see now is, if anyone has run a small business, and I know there's some business leaders on this call, city government will never have enough resources. You've never reached my mother and father work for the city, and I've been around this city more years than I care to think of. And you will never have the city government says, oh, got enough tax revenue now to solve our problems. That day will not come. What you do is you inventory your assets, you become extremely efficient in what you do. You look at the outcomes you're trying to drive, you measure them, you publish them, you evaluate yourself, you look at the outcomes, and you move and you act. And you act based on your values. And so I believe we have enough resources right now to build and treat ourselves out of the problem. My opponent routinely talks about what they will not do. And when I look at those in parks or on sidewalks, on play fields, I think we have the resources. In fact, I know we have the resources to act and act now. And one of the benefits of COVID, if there's any benefits in this pandemic, is that it allowed people to become introspective and do things that they might not have done. And so my attitude about COVID, and is exactly what I've done with many clients before I started running. Now you do your strategic planning. Now you do your site selection. Now you work the relationships. Now you build the tiny homes if that's a transitional strategy for 6 months. You have all of that in place such that you are ready to rock and roll when it's game time. You can use COVID as a paralyzing event to stop and justify inaction, or you can use it to accelerate that which you can do and that which you have control on. And so that's quite frankly why I'm successful, is because I've always looked at whatever impediment there is in front of me and figured out a way over it or around it to achieve an outcome. So I think I have more of an aggressive approach because, again, I'm seeing the same conditions you see. They have tents right across the street from City Hall on 4th Avenue. And I just think that is, we cannot become numb to that. We have to look at that and say, we have to act now. We have to have a sense of urgency.
So just to be clear, you would support clearing public spaces like sidewalks and city parks and city streets where, I mean, our TV station is in Soto. You walk right out the back door, and Utah Avenue for as far as you can see is just loaded with campers and cars and vulnerable people living there. Just to be clear, you would support the city clearing those spaces and figuring out a place to put them and a place to serve them. Is that right?
Yes, to be clear, my yes is the short answer. And the reason why I hum a few bars after that is I'm sure some would say, well, what do you do with them? Where do you put them, et cetera? We should have been figuring all that out for the last year and a half. We should have had the sites. I give you a tiny home, for example. We can make one tiny home. There's one person on a paid staff with volunteers, about 10 to 12. They're producing for $4,000, 3 to 4 tiny homes a week. Okay. So we could quadruple the resources there. We could have had all of this in inventory. There's still unused property we could use. So yes, we want to move people. And during our first month in office, we will publish a plan. We'll take a snapshot of where people are. We'll talk about the deadlines by which you will measure us against, and we will act. So yes, Mark.
All right, we have about 15 minutes now for questions from our audience, which include Rotarians and guests. I'd like to take a question from Joel Connolly first. The next mayor must nominate a new Seattle police chief, often the most important personnel decision and one that can determine an administration's success or failure. How do we lure a highly qualified candidate to Seattle, given the recent turmoil and Carmen Best's, quote, I would say, quote unquote, retirement?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Joel. And I saw David Bruce on here as well. And I want to thank the both of you for following the race so closely and doing the work that you've done for decades in Seattle politics. So interestingly enough, Joel, that I've been getting contacted by chiefs of police all over the country. It seems to sort of be a closely knit group. Now, I do talk to Carmen Best fairly frequently, and perhaps she's excited about my candidacy and telling these folks to contact me. So what we'll have to do, quite candidly, this is just what I've been told, is that with our current chief, Adrian Diaz, I've had discussions with him. And I'll give this as an example, is that when Dr. Fisher was, I thought, cross-examined by the council on retention issues and recruitment issues, I said to Chief Diaz, who's interested in the job, that I'm looking for a chief that will push back to the council and say, how dare you not take any responsibilities for the situation we are in? And I'm looking for a person that will not only implement best practices in terms of policing, but will help change the narrative, a transformational leader. And so I said to Chief Diaz, I don't know if you feel as though you are empowered to be that leader, but I'd like to see it. So I will look at Chief Diaz, but I will also recruit chiefs around the country. And I don't think I'm going to have a problem, because I'm having former chiefs of Seattle Police Department contact me, as well as chiefs that have never been to Seattle for a chief of police position contact me. So I'm actually getting inquiries now, and we'll look forward to that whole process. I know what kind of chief I'm looking for. I know what he or she are going to bring to the table. They will have to be a master communicator. They'll have to be able to know how to change a culture with me. I want bold leadership, not passive leadership. So I know what I'm looking for. I know the skill set that I want, but I think I'll be fine in finding the right person.
Next question is from John Kilpatrick. When I first moved to Seattle about 25 years ago, this epicenter of entrepreneurship and an exceptionally business-friendly city, describing Seattle, indeed, that was one of the things that drew me here. I don't think that can be said today. Let's not lose sight of the extraordinary benefits a business-friendly attitude can accrue citizens of this fine city. Do you have a plan to restore Seattle to its business-friendly status?
Yes, thanks for the question. So the short answer is yes, but you surmise now I don't give short answers. What's interesting about Seattle, and even about this race in particular, is that I guess political types are quick to say, business candidate versus the progressive candidate or the labor candidate, and you start slapping all these titles into different narratives to describe a race. And what's interesting is I have spent a large part of my time in the business community. And for 12 years, I talk about the fact that there will be winners and losers in the jobs war coming out of the pandemic. Some of you have heard me speak before, and I talk about a book written by Jim Clifton called The Coming Jobs War, which is sort of my go-to book on what Seattle must be. We must be a city where we know how to keep to be able to retain and recruit for employment, again, layered upon public safety. We have a rich hand here. I mean, and people have to realize that just not maritime, port, and industry work, but biotech and high tech and manufacturing and sports and the arts world, arts and culture. We have a great hand here. So I talk about those things, and I'm not afraid to. The fact is, that's why my grandparents on both sides of my lineage have come here, is for jobs. And so I will have that narrative unashamedly to talk about having a strong business environment and not driving businesses outside of our city. The fact of the matter is, many people on my far political left are right, that corporations and high net worth individuals must pay their fair share of taxes, that we will look at this very regressive tax system here, and whether it's a Washington state income tax or complete tax revisions, looking out how we can erode the regressive nature. Yes, I am all in on that kind of work, looking at, again, how the people of lower income are often shouldering the benefit. But make no mistake about this. We need to keep jobs here in Seattle. I mean, we have to be unambiguous in that commitment.
Next question is from David Brewster. How should city government help schools better? Include Memorial Stadium in the next schools levy, build a new school at First and Battery.
Yeah, I love the concept of building a new school in First and Battery, or I'll just say in the downtown area. Because again, what the new downtown will look like is going to be a visioning exercise that some of you will participate in with me, realizing that some of the brick and mortar institutions were already on thin margins, even pre-pandemic. But to answer the question more specifically on the relationship with the school board, is I have to first figure out what the school board, I applaud people running for the school board. This job as mayor is tough, yes, but the school board, they don't seem to have enough resources to do their job effectively. And there seems to be a disconnect between the administration and the board. In other words, they don't get the information as timely or as thorough as they should. So my role has to figure out with the board and with the superintendent, and in full disclosure, the superintendent is a dear friend of 40 years, Dr. Brent Jones of mine, that I have to figure out what resources can I give them? The administration and the board. Is it secretarial or administrative resources? Is it research we can independently do? We already know through our levy what we can do for the kids, and we'll double down on all those, whether we're making sure they are well fed and well nourished throughout the course of the day, whether we're using our facilities and our recreational centers for after school. One of the things I know we can do, and I will do this as mayor, is there are hundreds of thousands of mentors and counselors and quote unquote teachers out there that can help kids with homework and self-imaging and self-esteem issues. And I want to pull all of that and give that to the school district, that we have the wherewithal to do that. That's what, when Pat and I talked before this call, that's what changed my life. I was not in the Seattle public schools. I was accepted to Harvard and Stanford and these great schools coming out of the Seattle public school system because I had smart people mentoring me when I was 13, 14, and 15 years old in Seattle. So I realized the benefit of that. I'm a beneficiary of that. So what the city will do is bring this bench strength. And I ask people all the time, can you take 3 or 4 kids and meet with them twice a week? And the hands will go up. We have compassionate people. So the relationship with the school board, I will meet with them consistently, figure it out. And you talk about race and social justice, you talk about all the things that end in justice. That educational facility is going to be the center of the equalizing force on raising all boats. And so I'm not giving the best answer in terms of clarity because we have to develop that together, but I'll give them all the resources they need to succeed.
Next question is from Larry Granite. I've seen a TV commercial where you supposedly received a $100,000 contribution from a Trump supporter. You supposedly returned a small part of said contribution. Why was this donation given to you?
Yeah. First of all, that's a completely misleading and deceptive ad. I did not receive $100,000 from this person. Let's just put that out there. We received $550 from this person, and we returned that $550, period. Now, having said that, I don't know this person. I never met this person. I've never talked to this person. We all know that there is a PAC that supports me, and I can neither influence or control or do anything with that. And so this person who I do not know has apparently donated money to that. I cannot even tell them what to do. So that ad just shows you, quite frankly, I think how desperate some people are to keep out the things that I'm saying in office, because that is totally misleading. And quite frankly, it's offensive that I supported Biden. I canvassed for Biden. I've been a lifelong Democrat since 1977. And to link me with the insurrection on January 6th, that is offensive. I would have thought even my opponent would have called out the offensive nature of that attack ad. But, we talked about, again, I don't know Nick Anderson, at least I don't think that I know him, but he talked about operating out of love. And I say, I operate out of love, hope, and faith. And so I'll just ignore it. But I did not receive $100,000 from this person. I received $550, and that's all we could do is return that, and we did so. But the truth will always prevail over falsity. That's one of my core beliefs. And so the truth is that our message is on point. Our message resonates with the voters of this city, and that's why we should win.
Next question from Beth Knox. Well, we have numerous challenges in Seattle that require creative solutions. How do you view the value of sports and special events in helping make a positive social and economic impact on our region in the meantime?
Yeah, well, I hate sports. I don't think we should even have sports in the city. I'm just waking you guys up here. Well, sports, arts, culture, those are unifying activities that brings out the competitive spirit, the concept of teamwork. I always tell people aspiring to get into, chess as a sport, which requires, I put our kids in chess when they were young. I said, the thing about chess is you can't say the sun got in my eyes or I slipped. The ball was wet. It's all intellectual. But any activity that stimulates those creative juices and creates teamwork is a good thing. And I'd love a question or two, perhaps back channel about our plans on the NBA Sonics team. And sorry, the Kraken lost on their first game, but I'll tell you that I am excited about bringing that vibrancy into Seattle again and being sort of the biggest cheerleader. It's a unifying element. I love seeing these kids and young adults try to do things. My daughter played ultimate frisbee. She was a D1 athlete, but I remember I said, ultimate frisbee, what's that? And just looking at the joy of co-ed kids, different races, cultures, ethnicities, abilities. But I got to say one thing about sports. I just want to say this, that kids are interesting because by the time they are 12 or 13 or 14, you already know who the more advanced athletes are going to be and who are just going to be JV. And my daughter reminds me, who won several state championships, that I maxed out on JV basketball. I only made it to JV. I never could make varsity in basketball. And when I was trying to coach her up, she looked at me, she says, "Dad, you played JV." So she put me in my place. But one of the ideas that I floated around when I was in the council, I just couldn't get a mayor to bite, was that the rec centers in the gym, the big basketball courts, we know during urban visioning back in the 70s why the city started building these big basketball courts, but a lot of them are waste of square footage. And what I would like to do is to be able to use our golf courses as a means to mentor people. I don't golf, but I want to get many people who do golf to build relationships with some of these inner city youth. And I know some people are doing some work. There's First Tee and some other works, but I want to put that on scale. I took judo when I was young, and my parents had the wisdom to put me in judo when I was 8 years old. I want to be able to use sports as not just a means by which, parents could be proud, but the relationships could be developed. And so you're going to see a sort of a new narrative on how we use sports for our youth and how we're going to create new relationships that have not been established in the city.
Okay, just about a minute left for your answer on this one, Bruce, if you would. Final question from Alvaro Jimenez. Why no political candidate except independent libertarians support rezoning of SoDo and similar areas to allow for modular and 3D housing provided by private sector? That, coupled with social programs to support employment placement and mental health, would fix the homelessness problem. But the Seattle zoning and code maintains the real estate status quo.
So I understood about 30% of that question. So you're going to hum a few bars on that one. Can you dummy down the question, please?
Yeah, I'm guessing it's looking at coming up with more creative zoning for the city to allow more things like modular housing, tiny homes, things like that, to create spaces.
Well, let me at least address it, at least my understanding of the question. So I think a difference between my opponent and I, she is on record as saying she supports the total elimination of single family zoning, which sort of comes out of a movement in this country and a conversation in this country that's happening nationwide. And I'm following it very closely. I do not support that at this point. I'm looking at in Minneapolis as an example where they've came up with a 2040 plan where you look at, yes, let's put duplexes or triplexes where it makes sense. And I do believe we should use our zoning as it should be as flexible as possible to increase density, increase creativity. I'm very interested in, again, we have hundreds of thousands of unused, untapped zoning capacity around the city. So I want to fully explore that. And I also want to get more into home ownership or condo ownership in apartment buildings because we have anyone that's done condo conversion work know that's it's very difficult in Washington State to convert apartment buildings to condominiums. And so I want to get as creative as possible. Yes, attached dwelling units, detached dwelling units, making it easier for homeowners through financing or through the regulatory scheme to make it easier for them to build perhaps rental income on their existing lot. So we will work with neighborhoods, we'll work with communities. It'll be a conversation, and I will lead those conversations next couple of years. And we will we realize, we all know economics 101, supply and demand. So we're going to have to increase density where it makes sense. And it's going to be a good discussion, a collaborative discussion. I look forward to it.
All right, that's all the time we have. Members and guests, if you could please help me in thanking Bruce Harrell for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
All right, Bruce, thank you very much.
Okay.
And now joining us for a similar discussion of 15 minutes of Q&A with me and 15 minutes of Q&A with you is our current City Council President, Lorena Gonzalez, and also candidate for mayor. Lorena, it's great to have you here. And I'm not hearing you.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
There we go.
I was having I was competing with the unmute button.
Yeah. If I had a nickel for every time somebody said, Mark, you need to unmute.
Yeah.
Well, Lorena, it's great to have you here. Really looking forward to this discussion with you. And I'm going to pose most of the same questions to you that I did, but I'll tailor some of them based on your experience. So you've served on the Seattle City Council from 2016 to the present. I'd like just an opening statement from you about what you're most proud of during your time on the council and why you decided to run for mayor.
Sure. So I've been in public service since 2015 when I was first elected citywide. Back then became the first Latina to be elected to any citywide role in city government. And I'm certainly proud of that particular achievement. And since I've been on the council, I've had an opportunity to work on some really important policy issues that have certainly, I think, allowed us to make progress in some particular areas, but we have not, there's still much more work that needs to be achieved. I think I've been proudest of my work on behalf of working families, on behalf of survivors of sexual assault and abuse, and in the space of championing, really being the leader in our city on issues related to police accountability and reform. And I bring to bear much of my experience as a former attorney in this state, where for 10 years prior to becoming an elected official, I worked as a civil rights attorney right here in our community, holding really powerful interests accountable for when they violated the rights of the elderly, of children, and of workers who needed great amounts of access to our justice system to be able to correct those wrongs. So looking forward to putting all of that experience and those values to work for the people of this city as we continue to address the important issues of making meaningful progress on homelessness, particularly for those who are chronically homeless in our city, and in continuing to advance programs and investments that build out our affordable housing infrastructure throughout the city, in every neighborhood in the city, to make sure that we are producing real meaningful housing choice as both a prevention mechanism, but also as a way for us to begin to exit people who are stuck in our shelter system to their forever home. So I look forward to answering your questions. I'm going to leave it there.
Okay. I've spoken with a number of nonprofit and business leaders in Seattle who told me to a person that until Seattle is safe, nothing else matters when it comes to running their nonprofit, their shelter, their business. Do you agree with that statement? And what would you do as mayor to help fix that problem?
I think it comes down to a definition of what safe means. And I agree. I think all of us want to have a city that we feel is safe for us and our children. I'm a brand new mom. I have a beautiful 1.5-year-old with a head of hair. You couldn't imagine how big this head of hair is. And as a new mom to a young baby, I want her to be able to live in a safe community, in a community that respects each other's humanity, and that also understands that these systemic issues cannot be addressed simply by having large investments in law enforcement systems that have created punitive results for a lot of people, but don't actually address the systemic root causes that are causing people to engage in negative behavior. And so while I believe that people need to be held accountable once they do engage in that behavior, I also am deeply invested in the hard work that's going to be required to invest upstream in children's education and healthcare and in our housing stability and in creating economic opportunity for people to work so that we are preventing that kind of unsafe behavior in the first place. So I think there's an opportunity for us to both look at how we can set up and invest in those systems that really address issues like poverty, income inequality, and our mental health crisis and behavioral health crisis, while also, making sure that we have the law enforcement systems in place that are needed while we continue to scale up our investments in these community safety initiatives.
The city council fairly recently discussed cutting the police budget by 50%. I think the actual cut was something like 17%. Mm-hmm. I've talked with business owners downtown who say every day someone comes in and steals the tip jar from employees and steals other merchandise and simply walks out the door. When they call the police say the same thing. We don't have anybody to send. Is anybody hurt? Is anybody being threatened? So I think the disconnect for a lot of people who work in downtown Seattle is that they understand your idea of getting to the root causes, but in the meantime, they're getting stuff stolen every day. So with a department that has been cut, that can't respond to those kinds of crimes, how do we get from point A to point B in the transition? Does that question make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's, I think that I want to start off by saying that the Seattle Police Department's, staffing plan, the proposal they make to the city council and to the mayor in terms of how many dollars they think they'll need to be able to hire officers, has been consistently, including last year, fully funded. So they do have the resources they need to be able to hire the individuals that are necessary to fill that staffing plan. And I want to say, to those who express these concerns, I hear them as well, because I'm currently an elected official and have an opportunity to talk to a lot of these small business owners. And that, that behavior and those consequences are not appropriate. And it's unfair for us to, continue to expect small business owners in particularly to continue to bear the burden and the consequence of our, sort of slowness in standing up many of the systems that we know are going to be needed to really address the root causes and prevent people from engaging in that behavior in the first place. I will tell you, though, that the system that currently exists is one that is designed to arrest people for that behavior. And it has resulted in a very expensive way of trying to address low level, thefts and criminal behavior that has not produced the outcome that we want. I mean, the outcome that I want is for people not to feel like they have to engage in that behavior, and for small business owners not to have to worry about that as part of their business plan. And so we need to continue to invest in things like the Health One mobile unit, the Triage mobile one unit, which will be in place starting January 1st. And we need to continue to change our built environment to encourage more people to come into our public spaces and engage in positive behavior. And I think there's an opportunity for the next mayor to really lead the conversation and the investments that are going to be necessary to address those environmental issues and to continue to work with small business owners, with the council, and with SPD on how to create more efficient systems that are going to be more responsive to neighborhood safety concerns, like the community service officer program that currently exists, and I'm very interested in expanding, that can really be much better positioned to address some of these quality of life concerns while allowing the SPD to continue to focus on the more serious violent crimes that are happening in our city.
The city used to send out what were called navigation teams made up of police and social workers to clear homeless camps. The navigation teams were phased out Why was that not the right approach? And I'd like you to clarify your position on people who camp and currently live on public places like parks and sidewalks and things like that. Do you support the idea of clearing those out or not?
I think I just want to start off here by saying that, encampments anywhere in our city are unacceptable. And, people who are surviving outside anywhere in our city is unacceptable. People being stuck in shelters waiting for their forever home is unacceptable. And so I am, unlike my opponent, I'm running for mayor to urgently and rapidly end encampments in our city. And I believe we do that by bringing inside our chronically homeless neighbors rather than simply sweeping them out of the way and punishing those who remain outside. And so for me, that means supporting the solutions we know work, which is deep community engagement done by subject matter experts who are our social workers and our community outreach workers and our homeless outreach workers, and pairing that with available shelter space that is appropriate to meet the needs of the individual who's receiving the offer. And so unfortunately, under our navigation team model, it was a law enforcement first approach that was actually not producing the outcomes that we needed to see in terms of actually transitioning people from outside to inside. That program only saw a 6% placement rate of people who were being referred to housing. And now we are doing an outreach first approach and pairing that with shelter. We are seeing a much higher placement rate. But let's be really clear, though, that the issue with being able to bring people inside is fundamentally about a lack of available shelter. And that is going to be the challenge for the next mayor, is to quickly work with human service providers, with shelter service providers, and with our outreach workers to identify the kinds of shelter that are needed that people want to say yes to. And we have much studies and information that tell us that that's exactly what chronically homeless people are looking for. And my plan, which is posted on my website, clearly lays out a plan for how we are going to rapidly scale up our shelter and intensify our community outreach efforts to bring an end to the fact that people are surviving outside.
I've talked with some business and nonprofit leaders in Seattle, and many are extremely reluctant to talk to the media about the current safety crisis in downtown Seattle. They're very afraid to go on record for fear of backlash. And I think underlying that fear is that people who appear to be pro-business have been attacked, quite literally, on social media. They've received death threats. How do we get back to the place where businesses in Seattle and people at the other end of the spectrum, if there is such a thing, can all sit at the same table and not vilify the other side? How do we get back to that place of just being able to come together?
Well, I think that, the reality is that our politics are rather polarized right now. I don't think that this is unique to the city of Seattle. We just went through a rather raucous federal election, for example, that had much of the similar dynamics. And so I think I think that it's important for us all to acknowledge that we bear some responsibility in that polarization, regardless of what side of the spectrum you see yourself on. And that's an important part of sort of the exercise around truth and reconciliation, to get to a point of where we can just have conversation with each other and agree to disagree in some instances. And I think, that's how I have tried to lead my work as an individual elected to current city leadership is trying to approach people from an understanding that they care. And we may differ on how to achieve the goal, but if we can, at a minimum, agree to define, have a shared goal, then I think it's really about how do we get to that goal. So again, as it relates to community safety, I too want to live in a city that is safe, that is vibrant, that is walkable, where we can all prosper and have good housing and safe places to seek refuge. I want that for our city, and I want that for our future, for our families and for all of the children in the city and workers in our city to have that. And so how do we get there? I think for me, I really, as a civil rights attorney, as somebody who's been working as a reformer all my life, I think it's the hard work of creating safety really does require us to look at these systemic changes and to not resort to the easier solution of simply looking to law enforcement to fix all of the social ills in our city. We hear from law enforcement officers and from public safety officers all the time that they are tired of being saddled with being social workers and with being mental health crisis counselors out in the field. And so we have a responsibility to be responsive to that workforce concern and to really stand up these other systems that are going to do better. It's going to be a little bit of a sliding scale there, right? Sort of how do we scale up these other systems that are going to be more responsive to all of our needs? And we need to do that scaling up before we make any sort of drastic changes on the other end of the spectrum.
We have 15 minutes for questions from our guests and our members. First question is from John Bridge. Mm-hmm. I worry about the loss of Seattle's tax base to competing suburban communities. How are we going to attract and retain retail and office jobs within our city limits?
Well, thanks so much. Hi, John. Good to hear a question from you. I think, I have an opportunity now to take a look at what our revenue and economic forecasts are, which are fundamentally based on our tax base, which is part of John's question. And I have to say that our economy is doing very well in our recovery, with the exception of our tourism and hospitality industry. And part of that, it is directly related to COVID and people sheltering in place across the country. So I think that Seattle can continue to be a place where people want to do business and where people's workforce wants to live by making sure that we are investing in things like public transit and good parks and good schools and our collective community safety. When we invest in those things that make us a vibrant city, we continue to be the place where most people want to have business, because this is where their workers want to live. Workers want to live in areas of urban density, and areas that have a strong commitment to things like climate justice and housing justice. These are the things that attract workers to want to come to live in a booming, vibrant city like our beautiful city.
Next question is from Joel Connolly. An effective mayor must deal with all constituencies, including those with whom you disagree. You blew off the Downtown Seattle Association questionnaire. You're getting lots of labor money and demonizing the business community in your money appeals. How will you deal with those you demonize? Or are you going to be the mayor just for those who agree with you? Yep, sorry. We can't hear you. Got to unmute, Lorena.
I got muted and then I couldn't unmute myself.
There we go. Did you hear the question okay?
I did. I heard the question just fine. Thanks so much. Listen, I'm not going to apologize for being a staunch advocate for working families. That's who I think needs to be centered by the next mayor, not strong, powerful corporate interests. I have built my career on fighting on behalf of working families who are left out of shared prosperity every single day of their lives. That comes from a place of having grown up as a migrant farm worker myself. I earned my first paycheck at the age of 8, worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, and am the first and only lawyer in my family. And I chose to dedicate my career to holding powerful interests who violate the rights of ordinary people as my career choice. And so I believe that in this moment, as we are dealing with an intersection of crises related to the pandemic, which has disproportionately impacted Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, to the economic recession, which has also disproportionately impacted workers in our city. My own husband, last year, restaurant worker, spent more than half the year on the unemployment rolls for the first time in his life, and he's 50. So these are the folks who need a mayor on the 7th floor to center policies that are good for a vast majority of the people of the city, as opposed to just for a few powerful interests who have, really controlled the 7th floor and the mayor's office for years. So I'm proud to be supported by thousands of working people across our city, and to have a grassroots donation that is really focused on small donations being made to it by many working people across the city and small business owners. And I think it's because they know that I'm going to show up to City Hall every day as their mayor and make sure that I'm making policy choices that are going to benefit a vast majority of working people in this city who desperately need to be represented and advocated on behalf of.
Next question is from Skip Kotkins. There has been a lot of coverage of the third-party ad trying to imply that Bruce Harrell is a Trump supporter because of donations from one donor. This is a deliberately misleading ad for anyone who appreciates the truth. So do you approve of that misleading ad?
Well, I think I have a different perspective on what the ad is trying to say. Look, listen, again, thousands of low-wage workers pull their money together, sometimes at $2 a paycheck, because that is the only way they can compete with heavyweight political donors who are supporting my opponent. And I'm not going to silence the voice of thousands of workers who've chosen to make their voice known in this way. So, workers have chosen how they want to use their voice, and it is to highlight that it is beyond dispute that my opponent is benefiting from hundreds and thousands of dollars from wealthy interests, including supporters who fund Trump and his Stop the Steal efforts that have displaced and gentrified our neighborhoods. And he's also and also being supported by people who actively oppose progressive revenue and people who are fine with growing inequality in our city. And so I think that's what I hear from workers every day that their concern is, and I think that is what they have the right to communicate to voters, so that voters understand that there is a clear choice in this race for mayor.
Next question is from Caroline Bobanek. I'm tired of walking to the Pike Place Market and seeing people freebasing and shooting up in the street. Why has this become our new normal? Sorry about that. Go ahead.
That's okay. I don't think it's the new normal. Substance use disorder treatment has existed within our communities since the beginning of time. And what is unfortunate is that what the new normal is an active divestment from behavioral health systems that were well funded at some point, certainly better funded than they are today, that really provide people the access they need to the mental health, behavioral health, and substance use disorder treatment that they need to heal and become stable. You combine that with the reality that people are now losing their homes, and where they might have been using substances before, and now they are left with no home and a ever increasing substance use disorder with ongoing lack of access to any kind of meaningful treatment to address their substance use disorder. So that's why, as mayor, I want to focus immediately on leveraging all possible resources, including my relationships with our congressional delegation and our state delegation, to begin to identify new investments and additional resources that we're going to need at the City of Seattle to address the issues of behavioral health, including substance use disorder treatments in our city, so that we can prevent these preventable deaths and create a meaningful pathway that is not incarceration, that really will allow folks to get back on their feet, stabilize, and become stable members of our community.
Question from David Brewster. How successful do you think the Black Brilliance report was? And if you could explain what that is, that would be great. And do you regret not exercising more oversight?
Well, appreciate the question from a member of the media corps here, but listen, I think the Black Brilliance Project, for those that aren't familiar with it, was an effort for the city to invest some money in Black-led community organizations in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, to provide the city with some research and analysis on what areas of investment would be necessary to correct the wrongs of our collective historic past, which is the legacy of, and in some instances, active act of racism against Black members of our community in particular, that have led to exorbitant racial wealth gaps in our city between white individuals and Black individuals. And what we saw in that report was a survey of thousands of people in our city who articulated their needs. And that report is the first part of a broader body of work that will influence the city's commitment to engage in participatory budgeting. So many of you may have seen that the mayor transmitted her proposed budget. It does include $30 million for participatory budgeting. This first part of the work related to the Black Brilliance Project will feed directly into that participatory budget process and will continue to be utilized to influence how the city invests in communities of color to again create an opportunity for some shared prosperity and to create greater equality amongst our city, particularly amongst our BIPOC community members.
Okay, I'm going to try to combine three questions into one. Let's see how this goes.
Great.
I think some people are disgusted with the current city council. Some people say the current city council should have done more to solve homelessness, but hasn't. And I think Jim Moore's question kind of wraps all this up. Over the past 2 to 3 years, the Seattle City Council has gained a nationwide reputation for dysfunction. Would you explain why you believe this characterization is incorrect or correct, and what can be done to make the next city council more effective in meeting the needs of the city? So I guess in a nutshell, you've been in the chair, you're in the seat of leadership, you have been for several years now, and some people are wondering why the dysfunction, why hasn't more been done?
Well, I think, I've been on the city council for 6 years. My opponent was on the city council for over a decade. And I just want to, lift up the fact that a city council is the equivalent of the legislature for our city. And in order for city government to be operating smoothly and moving in the same direction, it is important to have, strong relationship and communication between the mayor's office, which is the executive of the city, and the legislative branch, which is the city council. And in my 6 years as a city council member, I have served with 4 mayors in 6 years. And that has created a lot of instability. And unfortunately, we're going through another transition right now. And so I think that the reality is that we are working hard every day to meet the increasing demands of people in our city who are being left out of our systems, people who are, increasingly becoming more housing unstable, people who are in desperate need of our local government to be that safety net because of the inequities that continue to exist in our city. We are also all of us, whether you're in an elected position or not, we are all dealing and trying to understand and wade through a historic, once in a lifetime global pandemic that is killing our elders and that had an extraordinary impact on our economy. All of that in the context of the movement around Black Lives Matter and you know what we all witnessed last summer, which was the brutal murder of George Floyd. And I think that those conflating crises have really led to an increase in the amount of cries that we are hearing from people who, again, really desperately need local government to work and to work together to address the most pressing needs in our city, as I've just described them.
All right, we are out of time. I would like to ask our members and guests to please thank you for your time and also for your willingness to serve our community. And thank you for being here today, Lorena.
Thanks so much, everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.
Mark, thank you so much to our two guests. Thank you so much. Quick shout out before we wrap things up today to our great list of sponsors, including Liz Powell, Bob Alexander, Joel Farrell, Dominic Masafia, Jacobson Jarvis and Company, and our good friend Matt